So what I got here is just 2 tubs of manure. I put the manure in a tub like this, and then I stick it in the trunk of my car. And again, you don't need manure, but I can source it for free, so it makes sense for me. Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com, and today I'm going to do a video on using horse manure that isn't fully composted. It's not fresh out of the horse, but it's not broken down enough to say it's now just compost. It is half composted horse manure. And people often ask me about horse manure and how to get, they'll say in my area I can't get, it's really hard to get, 2-year or 3-year aged horse manure. If you live near a horse stable, generally speaking, the horse manure that isn't aged, you can get it for free because they want to get rid of it. But if it's well aged, 2-3 years in a pile, they sell that stuff and people will buy it. So the free stuff is the stuff that hasn't really aged properly, and that's what I've got here. This stuff is not aged. There's, the grass in it. There's lots of grass in it. It hasn't broken down. There's pucks. Not all the little pieces. I'm touching this with my fingers. I'm going to have to wash my hands afterwards, but not everything here is broken down. A well-aged horse manure, there should be no green. It should just be black, 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 and brown sort of thing. There should be no green. There should be no, that sort of thing. It should look like any sort of compost. And that's not what I've got here. This is horse manure that I just got from a stable. It looks like it was probably sitting on top of the pile all winter. It's had some exposure to air. It's broken down somewhat because there's some black there. It's not just solid green pucks sort of thing, but it's certainly not well aged. But it's time to start planting, and I want to get stuff going. And there's a way to use this in a garden that's totally fine, and I've done it lots of times. That really minimizes weeds and stuff like that, and works a lot better than you. Sorry, my neighbor's got the ride-on mower going. Hopefully that isn't too much of a problem with the sound. I got neighbors. So anyway, this is the time I got to make this video, so I got to make it. So the first step, I've got a garden bed here. I haven't got this sort of fastened to the ground in any sort of way. I just have it sitting, floating, right? I don't want this moving around while I'm working in here. So all I'm going to do with my rake is just move the stuff on top around to the edge. It'll just sort of hold it in place. I could put pegs in and I could do something like that. But by just moving this stuff around a bit, so it's up against the edges like this, like that, it'll prevent it from moving around unless you really slam into it. Right, just like that. All right, the front here. So now if this gets bumped, it's not going to move. You got to really kick it to have it move. Okay, so that part's done. Now the next step is to get in here, and the general approach here is that we're going to take, let's say 3 or 4 inches of this topsoil here. I'm going to remove it. I'm going to put the horse manure down, and I'm going to put the topsoil back on top of the horse manure. That's the idea. And when the horse manure is, about 4 inches deep, when you've got 4 inches of soil above horse manure, generally speaking, at least in my experience, the weed seeds that are in that manure will not germinate. Even if they do germinate, they won't make their way up through your soil. But all the nutrients and all the good stuff that's in that horse manure is going to be in your soil. Also, so the worms are going to be in there working that stuff around and distributing it throughout your soil. But also because you've got something underneath the soil that's hot, right? It's working. It's composting. You've got almost like a compost pile underneath your soil. It's going to warm your soil up. So very early in the year, it's around the end of April right now, but it's been a pretty cold April. I was out here, I wanted to shoot this video last weekend, a week ago, and I couldn't dig in the ground here. There was ice in the ground. But once you went down about 6 inches, it was ice. Hopefully, I just did the adjacent bed and it was fine, so hopefully there's no ice here. But I'm only going to dig up about 4 inches here. The bed next to this one, I did a hugelkultur bed. I'll put a link to hugelkultur, that technique, after this video. It's another way to sort of make a garden without buying soil. Right here I'm using free horse manure, and another way to make a garden without buying soil. There's nothing more repulsive to me than buying soil for many reasons, but mainly my own innate cheapness, is a hugelkultur garden, where you basically bury some rotten logs and stuff and put the soil back on top. But anyway, here we're putting some horse manure. We're just burying horse manure basically. It's kind of like trench composting, right? So yeah, I'm going to dig this up. I'll fast forward this and I'll be back with you in a few minutes. Alright, so the next step is to sort of level out the base here. So I've got basically like a fairly large trench. So I'm going to level this out a little bit, and I'm going to put my stuff in here. And the reason I'm leveling this out is so that so the whole thing sinks at the same pace. Remember, you're putting a bunch of stuff in here that's going to break down, right? So it's going to sink a bit. So you want the floor, I guess if we could call it that, to be as consistent as possible. You know, in a way, maybe this should be the title of the video. We could call this video Hugelkultur without logs. Because we're basically digging a trench, we're putting compostable materials in the trench, and then we're leaving it up to the worms and all that other stuff to distribute it throughout the soil. Right? Alright, so some weedy stuff here I want down here. Alright, now I got some now the next thing I'm going to do is put some things that I don't normally get to compost, you know, kitchen scraps into my garden, because you know, coyotes and stuff like that get at them. But in this instance here today, it doesn't matter because it's going to be buried, and the garden's fenced in, and I'm, you know, 99% confident that nothing's going to get in here and get at these. Okay, now I'm going to put some leaves and stuff on here. Bang. So we call this, people have asked me, I can't get logs where I live, where I am. I don't live next to a forest like you, Greg. So how do I do hugelkultur without logs? Well, you think about it, the leaves of a tree are basically everything that tree made in a given season. So in a sense, leaves are logs. There's actually way more nutrients in leaves than there are in logs. So I mean, you're putting something in here that's going to benefit the soil and the soil organisms. It's going to break down. It'll break down over, it'll take the logs will break down a lot more slowly than this, but this will break down, and it'll feed your soil. So it's a perfectly fine thing to put underneath. especially if you can't find logs or can't get a hold of them. If you live in any sort of neighborhood, people are going to be throwing out leaf bags for sure. So I was really thinking I would have put the paper on the bottom underneath everything, but because this breaks down just fine too. But I got other ways I can use this stuff, so that's fine. I mean, I drive through a urban area every morning on my way to work, and on the way home every day as well. And people throw this stuff away, so I pretty much have an infinite supply of leaves. Infinite supply of leaves. This is as good a fertilizer as anything. And people worry about it having the right carbon nitrogen mix. If it's, especially if it's deciduous tree leaves, everything will work out just fine, especially if you throw manure on top of it. I mean, if you're throwing manure with something, what are you worried about? It's going to work out. It's going to work out fine. Especially manure like this that's still a little bit green. It's not completely broken down, so it's got a lot of nutrients in it. Okay, so now the manure. So what I got here is just 2 tubs of manure. I put the manure in a tub like this, and then I stick it in the trunk of my car. And again, you don't need manure, but I can source it for free, so it makes sense for me. You can see how there's still formed pucks in there, right? So it's not, I mean, the pucks aren't green inside, but it certainly hasn't broken down completely, right? So it's not ideal, but horse manure, unlike a lot of other manures, is very weak. It's not a strong manure. So all I'm doing here is just spreading this out. Now, as we go on here, I'm going to show you how and there's some hay. You can see the hay in with that manure, and there are millions of viable seeds in here. People always say, how do you prevent the weeds and that sort of thing? You don't worry about it. But mainly it's because of the way I apply the mulch on top of this. I don't really have to worry about weeds. So I'll put some sort of paper or cardboard. You can see there's a lot of hay in with this, but that hay is soaked up all the stuff, if you call it something, stuff that was in the manure. So the hay is basically manure in all the ways that matter. Alright, so I've got that reasonably distributed. Now I'm just going to go sort of walk around a bit and, pat it down a bit. I'm sort of scraping the original dirt I packed up around the sides. I'm sort of moving that off a bit, just to help level it out. Well, you can see this doesn't take long. The hardest part of this is digging it up. And that's good exercise, in my opinion. We live fairly sedentary lives, so it's nice to have something physical to do on the weekends. Your body doesn't mind. Okay. So there, we've basically put like years worth of nutrients in this beneath the soil. Of course, we're going to be mulching this perpetually as well. So the soil that I'm going to put back on top here is going to be getting fertilized from the bottom by virtue of the worms and their action, and fertilized from the top by virtue of the mulch and what the worms and other organisms, of course, are doing So this is going to be a fertile garden. It's going to do great. I'm going to plant carrots here today, I believe, and I am fully confident they're going to work out just fine. Right? The great thing about using these, having some buckets around like this, is just so easy to get everything back in, right? It's kind of a, yeah, just a lot simpler proposition. Piece of cardboard there. Alright, now that's all that's left to do is to just smooth it out. Actually, let me make myself some real estate here. From this point onward, I really don't want to be walking on the soil, right? And this is soil. One thing you want to do, because I made a bit of a trench down the middle, and because the edges are a bit more solid than the center, you do want to sort of make your middle a little higher than your outer edge. Because the middle, you know, despite everything I've done here, the middle will go down a bit more than anything else. So I'm just grading it up a little bit, just using my rake to make the center just have a little bit more soil in the center, and hopefully it doesn't, by doing this, it'll all sort of sink evenly or relatively evenly. It's not a big deal, but it's nice to have things being uniform, and most gardeners appreciate uniformity to some extent. Alright, that's it. Alright, now in terms of planting technique, if you're going to plant something in rows, I'm going to plant carrots here. All I do, to keep it really simple, is I take these strips of cardboard. I like to get these really nice and soaked and wet, and you don't need this to prevent the weeds from the manure. And the manure weed seeds are not going to get through all of this soil. I've never experienced that. They don't seem to make it through. But because we've disturbed this soil and moved it all around, whatever weed seeds fell out of the sky, which is probably in the thousands, you know, they're going to be active and they're going to want to grow. So we still got weed seeds in the soil anyway, despite all of our, you know, efforts in burying the manure. The main reason we bury the manure is that we don't have our vegetables growing directly in it. You know, the carrots might get deep eventually and get down to where that manure is, but it'll be broken down a lot more by then, and it'll give them this huge boost in the heat of the summer when water's scarce. All that manure and all that material, that organic material down there, will hold water, and I won't have to water this garden at all. As usual, if you watch my videos, I really don't. From some point in July through the rest of the year, I just stop watering. So anyway, to prevent those weeds that are just in the soil, you just put layers of cardboard down, maybe about 2 inches apart. You know, about, what would that be in centimeters? 6 centimeters, something like that. And you put your seeds down here. And to make the cardboard a lot easier to work with, it really helps to soak it. You just take a bucket, fill it with water, and put these in and get the cardboard nice and wet. And they'll be heavier. They'll be less likely to blow away while you're working with them. They'll conform to the shape of the soil a lot better. They'll of course have water in them, so that's good. And then just to keep them in place, you just find things like, you know, logs or rocks or sticks, or mulch if you've got some nice, you know, some stuff like this, some nice wet, grassy, leafy type stuff. You can put that on top of the cardboard to hold it down. I've used seaweed before. Basically anything that's got some weight, that's gonna clump together and not really blow away too much. I get a lot of wind here, but this stuff sort of doesn't. You put it down, you sort of pat it on, and it'll just dry in place and it'll hold water. And generally speaking, these will not blow away if you do that. I've done lots of videos on this. I don't want to get into it, but I know people are going to ask, what do you do next? What's the next thing, right? So I've shown you how to build a garden out of basically, you just got a wooden box. This is just 2x6, and for those that are talking about, raised beds and stuff like that, unless you've got a back problem or something like that, there is no advantage in going up. You're just moving your plants further away from where the water is, right in the ground. So there's really no point in putting all that energy into and spending money on that. And for that matter, you really don't need a box at all. I just like boxes. So that's what you do if you're going to do the cardboard strip, if you're planting something that likes rows, like carrots or beets or that sort of stuff. But let's say you want to plant, like the adjacent garden over there, I'm going to plant cucumbers. So for something like that, I like to use these old leaf bags, right? I'm always picking up leaves anyway. So you just, maybe you throw something on top of the soil, like some seaweed or some mulchy stuff like this, right? You throw that around because that's food for the soil organisms. Then you put your paper bag down. Again, it's good to take these and dunk them in some water and get them really good and wet. That way they'll kind of, when they dry, they'll dry to the shape you put them in when they were wet. So you put them in the soil like this, and imagine, actually, you know what, I'm going to wet this just so you can see what I'm talking about. Hang on a second here. Okay, one more reason to have a goldfish pond is it's easy to wet bag. So now the bag's nice and wet, and it just wants to take the shape I'm imposing on it. So it's just easier to work with. It doesn't blow around. It's nice and flat, like paper mache. Right, so you just put this bag down. You'd cover the whole thing with bags, and then because you're planting something like a squash or a zucchini or a cucumber, you're going to plant those every 2 feet or every 16 inches, depends on whether you're going vertical or not. So you're not going to be making rows and stuff like that. Really, all you got to do is poke a few holes. Imagine this whole thing covered in paper, right, where you're going to put your seeds in. You just, you just make a hole, right? It's better to use, I don't have a knife out here, but you just, I don't know if you can see that in the camera, but I'll do it over here, right? You just make a hole. Make a hole, put your seeds in, put a bit of soil on top of that, and you basically have a weedless garden that's going to retain moisture very well. The bag is going to break down and rot and just disappear over the course of the season. You would, in between your holes, you'd put some mulch down. You don't worry about the weed seeds in the mulch because you've got that paper there. You're not going to do anything, right? And so, eventually the mulch will be broken down to some extent and the paper will be broken down, but by then you've got these huge plants that are shading out everything else. And so by the end of the season, the bags will be gone, most of the mulch will be gone, and you just remulch it in the fall for this next season, and now you've got this nice garden that self-perpetuates itself. You're going to add, so think about, this is a 6-inch high, this is a 2x6, and the soil is, I'd say only 3 or 2 inches above grade, right? So a good deal of this box isn't full of soil. So a good deal of the growing is actually happening quite close to the ground. One advantage of that, people are always asking me, how do you keep your mulch from blowing away? Well, if there's a little edge like this, it depends on what you're using, of course, but this sort of contains the mulch to some extent. It can't just roll around. It's going to hit the edge and stop, sort of thing, so it doesn't seem to blow away so much. It's also a good gauge for how much to add, right? If your soil's halfway up this and you fill it the rest of the way with mulch every year, it's going to, that's about the right amount. It solves the guesswork for you, right? You just keep adding to it, and it'll keep building and building, so the organisms in there will do that, and you just have a garden that perpetuates itself very well. Look, there's a worm working away already. Anyway, that is how you do the lazy man's hugelkultur, or hugelkultur with no soil, or whatever you want to call that. Geez, I just realized my microphone tipped over. I hope the sound wasn't too bad. That's the way you do that. So I hope you found that interesting, and if you did, please like, share, subscribe, hit the little bell thing so you don't want to drop a new video. Until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.